Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, every once in a while you just gotta play that music loud, and if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I am the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and conversational fashion. And if you like how we do things over here, I'm assuming you do. You're listening to the podcast right now. We'd love it if you'd subscribe to the podcast. You can find us over at Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, basically wherever you find your podcasts. And plus, we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So if you could like and subscribe to us there too, we'd really appreciate it. Also, you can find us on the social media, as the kids call it. You can check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and now TikTok. I don't know how to use TikTok yet, I'll be honest with you, but we're on TikTok, so if you're on TikTok, please give us a follow. But on TikTok, you can follow us just at In The Seats, but everywhere else, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, you can follow us either at In The Seats or at It's Podcast One for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please check us out over at In The Seats, intheseats.ca for all the latest and greatest movie news, television reviews, on-demand festival stuff. Basically, anything about the moving image is what we love to talk about, and quite frankly, we love it when you come and read about it. So please stop on by. We got a fun one. We got a real interesting talk on this one. We're heading into PBS land, and we're heading into a bit of a musical icon, and we're looking at a documentary about the life and times of the iconic Sergio Mendes, and it's a shortened version of a theatrical cut, which will be sort of available on demand in various places once theaters open up a little bit more. But it's playing through June on PBS, and it's called Sergio Mendes and Friends, a celebration, and it features Sergio Mendes with the likes of John Legend, Herb Alpert, Quincy Jones, will.i.am, and it's really a fun celebration of the man and his life and the music, which really is timeless to this very day. We got the unique pleasure of sitting down with director John Scheinfeld, who has a bit of a reputation doing a lot of rock documentaries, a lot of music documentaries. This was a fun one, and this is, if you're a music fan, this is a real interesting one. We had a great talk with John, and I hope you enjoy it, and I do recommend you go check out Sergio Mendes and Friends, a celebration, which is airing throughout June at your local PBS station. Check your local listings, but enjoy our talk with John first. Now, I guess my first question is because, obviously, I'm a music fan, and I knew who Sergio was, but just seeing sort of the warmth of the film really, and sort of how everyone you talked to was very excited to talk about Sergio, and Sergio himself was excited to talk. Like, what was sort of the birth of it? Did it come through your film with Herb, or was it just always wanting to do something about Sergio?
Actually, Dave, how it happened was because of Chasing Train, one of the record labels I had worked with was Concord. And Sergio is on Concord. And so the head guy, Scott Pascucci, came to me and he said, how would you like to do a documentary about Sergio Mendes? And I hesitated for 5 seconds. And I said, I'll do that. And the reason being that my mom used to play his records all the time when I was growing up in Wisconsin. And she would dance and sing and around the house as she was listening to this music. So I always had a feeling that this was very joyous, happy, uplifting music. And but I didn't really know a lot about his story. So I went off and I did some due diligence. And the more I looked at this, the more I thought, this is a story that needs to be told. He's a guy who came from a small town in Brazil and ended up having a significant impact on the music world, not just in the United States, but globally. And his is a story of persistence, of talent, but also of that most rare of abilities in a musician, which is to continually reinvent himself. So he didn't keep doing the same old, and be on the oldies circuit
Sure.
performing. In each decade, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, he found a way to reinvent himself and reinvent his sound to keep himself current. And I think that's admirable and worthy of a celebration, which is what our film Sergio Mendes in the Key of Joy is.
How was he as a subject? Because I mean, even throughout the film and you're talking to him, he never struck me as a guy who wanted to look back. He always wanted to look forward, which I think is part of the magic of him and why he deserves to be celebrated. But how was he sort of one-on-one to talk to about all this stuff?
Well, you're absolutely right about Sergio being an artist who's always looking forward. But I think when artists get to a certain age, perhaps they start to think about a legacy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think perhaps the timing was right. When Concord came to me and I decided, yes, this is something I'd like to do. I went out to, they set up a meeting with Sergio. And so I went out to his house. He lives here in Los Angeles and has for many years. And we had this 3.5-hour love fest. We just enjoyed each other. He's got a great warmth and openness and a wonderful sense of humor, very self-deprecating sense of humor. And he really liked my take on the film, which was not just to do he was born here and this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. I was much more interested in sort of peeling back the layers and helping to discover for myself and for the audience what were those critical events in his life that shaped the man and shaped the music. And he's totally signed on to that. And I think for the next 2 years while we were working on the film, it was just a terrific working relationship. He was open to talking about anything I wanted to talk about, exploring anything I wanted to explore. The thing about Sergio there, and we've sort of touched on this a little bit, Dave, is not only does he like looking forward, but he is a relentless optimist. The glass is always more than half full for him. And I think his life has been that way. It's not filled with lots of drama. There's no drugs. There's no, throwing TVs out of hotel room windows and stuff. But here's a guy who did things the right way. And I think in the world in which we've been living for the last 5-6 years, where it's so dark and there's all this argumentative stuff going on and hatred coming out and all of that, I just think it's great to be able to tell a story that's just so uplifting and joyous and fun and about those aspects of life that we ought to be celebrating.
No, and you know what? I think you're absolutely right. And I mean, it's one of those things where even from a musical and sort of pop culture standpoint, we're as audiences sort of preconditioned to think that genius must have had its chaotic period. Like I said, there were no drugs, there were no TVs out the windows with Sergio. It was the work and it was the music. And I mean, that's in and of itself a truly beautiful thing.
Very much so. And that's what we tried to capture in this film. And you see it not only in how he approached his life and his art, but you really can feel it coming from the people that he's crossed paths with professionally, whether it's Quincy Jones or John Legend or will.i.am or Common, Herb Alpert, all of those people, as you rightly said, really display a great affection for him. And that's who he is. I really think we captured what your listeners will see when they watch the film is really who he is.
No, and I mean, that's so important to put forward. And I mean, this is something that, like, this might be a bit of a loaded question, but this is something I've always wanted to ask because you have a rich history in doing sort of music documentaries and pop culture documentaries, but there isn't necessarily this one Sergio Mendes vault where everything is. How do you sort of go about sort of the process of research and finding all this archival footage that may have
changed hands over labels and over this and with rights and everything that, like, it seems like a really big monster to manage properly.
I don't think anyone's asked me that question before, David. Thank you. Making a documentary is very much like putting together a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
If you remember when you were a kid growing up for Christmas or your birthday or whatever, one of your relatives gave you a jigsaw puzzle, and you open up the box and you dumped out 1,000 pieces, and eventually you fit them together and makes a very pretty picture. But those pieces only fit together one way, and eventually you get there. What we do as documentary filmmakers, we could fit those pieces together 10 ways, 20 ways, 100 ways. And that's what makes a film good, bad, or ugly. So if you go to watch a film and you say, oh, that was really cool, they fit the pieces together well. If you came out and you say, oh, that sucked, it's because they didn't fit the pieces together. So for us, it's always the challenge of getting the right pieces and putting them together in a coherent, entertaining way. And so for Sergio, we needed to find, of course, photos, footage, performances, and they were, as you rightly say, scattered around, because over a career that's lasted 60 years, he's been on various labels and all of that. What made our job much, much easier is the president of Concord, Glenn Barrows. Not anymore, he left the label last year to start his own, but long-term president of Concord. Glenn was such a fan of Sergio that he signed Sergio to the label, and then over the last few years had set out to acquire Sergio's catalog. And so largely, Sergio's music is all under the Concord umbrella now. So all of his recordings for Philips in the 60s, Capitol in the 60s, A&M in the 60s and 70s, and then Elektra and Warner after that. He made deals either to acquire or lease them. And so at least in terms of the music, all under one umbrella. The archival was a different challenge altogether. For all the films I make about musicians, we cast a very wide net. So we go to Japan, we go to Australia, we go to England, we go to France, Germany. And in the process of checking all of our sources, we came across some really cool stuff. We have some footage in Sergio Mendes and Nakia Joy, for example, that came from a 1969 German documentary that even the Germans didn't know they had in the vault, and they weren't even sure they owned it. But we got it. And so we have some of that. Sergio had some photos from the Brazil 66 days, but not many. So we contacted our friends at the Universal Music Group, and they dug deep into their vault, and they found a number of boxes of photos, slides, and what we call job bags, which is the original artwork for the design of the cover of an album. So we found all of that stuff, which allowed us to really bring that era to life. So we found a lot of really rare stuff here and in Europe, but we also hired a researcher down in Brazil, and who knew the landscape down there. And he was able to find lots of great photos and footage of early Sergio when he was starting out in Brazil that has never been seen in this country, and probably has not been seen in Brazil since the 60s. So we're really jam-packed with a lot of really great audiovisual material to help tell this story.
Now, I mean, that kind of dovetails into something else I'd love to ask, because I mean, I'm always fascinated by just sort of the research and behind all this, but I mean, I've got to imagine from a creative standpoint, it's a different sort of gear from when you're having to be in the mindset of digging and looking for things versus something like the work you did, the Doctor Strangelove shorts that you did, which I absolutely loved. And I got to imagine all that stuff was pretty well under one roof. How does the process change for you when you don't necessarily have to go into that next sort of gear of digging for everything?
Well, it's an interesting question, David. I would say that even for Dr. Strangelove, there was some digging. Even though it was done by one studio and largely the material was there. I actually, just to take a side trip, I went to England in 2004 to meet with Kubrick's widow and the guy that runs the estate to talk about this and to secure their participation. But on that same trip, I had learned that the original ending for Dr. Strangelove, which kind of picks up where the released film finished, but then there's an extra, 5 or 6 minutes, and no one quite knew where this was, and we tracked it down to the British Film Institute, and they had it on a reel. So I got permission to go in there, and I got to tell you, David, it was one of the most interesting experiences. Here I am in a small dark room on a moviola. Your fans will know what that is. Watching the work of a dead director that he deemed not worthy of being in his film. And it was a fascinating experience to watch this thing. It was completely edited, scored, everything. And it really would have lent an entirely different feel to the end of the movie and the message that one takes away from that wonderful film. Ultimately, we weren't able to use it for a lot of different legal reasons. And I'm not sure anyone will ever see it, but I always consider myself so blessed to have had the chance to see something that so few people have. But I think there's always an element of searching. I call it the treasure hunt, where you're looking for the really cool stuff to put in a documentary. There's always some element of it. If you're lucky, you find a lot of it in one place. But no matter where you find it, the challenge remains the same. Because again, going back to the jigsaw puzzle reference, we have all these pieces. So we have photos, we have footage, we have videos, we have sound bites from all the interviews that I conducted. And we have all of those, and it's how do you lay those out in a story in a way that it makes sense and it's entertaining and keeps the audience engaged. And so the challenge is the same, really, regardless of where the material comes from. But to me, I love the treasure hunting. So I'm always a little disappointed if there isn't some hunting. You mentioned Chasing Train before, and I love to tell the story. We were, there's plenty of footage, plenty of photographs of Coltrane working in the studio, but there was no footage. And I may have told you this story when we talked years ago, I don't remember, but we were in New Jersey at the home of Chuck Stewart, who was a world-class photographer of jazz artists. And we were going through, I didn't want just his iconic shots of Coltrane, of which there were a good 10 or 15, but I wanted to see his negatives and his contact sheets. And so there's a stack of material that I'm going through. And I must have said something like, "Oh, shit." And Dave Harding, my producer, says, "What is it?" And I said, "Look at this photo." And he said, "What?" "It's like Coltrane and some guy in the studio. So what?" I said, "Look what the guy is holding in his hand." And what the guy was holding was a Super 8 movie camera. So of course I'm thinking he shot the session in the studio. So Chuck remembered who the guy was. It was a terrific bass player named Art Davis. And our researcher, Kiku, tracked down, Art had passed away in 2007. But his son is an insurance broker here in Van Nuys, California, about 15 minutes from our office. And so we called him up, explained who we were and what we were looking for. So, oh yeah, I got all the home movies in the garage. And when his dad passed away, he got this box of home movies and had never looked at them, didn't know what was on them. So we took a viewer out there, and Dave Harding did, and it took about 3 weekends. And a lot of it was just sort of mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, and the kids in the backyard kind of home movies. But then there it was, one color reel, 7 minutes, no sound, but 7 minutes of Coltrane and his band in the studio in 1964. 65. And it was just like a fantastic find. And so even though we did get a lot of Coltrane material from his various labels, it was lovely to be able to find that item.
Yeah, I've got to imagine that's one of the joys of the job, because from, I mean, just a purely archaeological standpoint, that feels like finding the Holy Grail.
Oh, absolutely is. I'm working on a film now, and we're in search of the Holy Grail, and I'm not sure we're going to find it, but we're trying. In 1970, the jazz rock band Blood, Sweat and Tears had gone on a U.S. State Department tour behind the Iron Curtain. They were the first rock band to perform behind the Iron Curtain. They went to Yugoslavia, Romania, and Poland, and they took a documentary film crew with them, with the intention of making a 2-hour documentary for theaters. And they shot about 65 hours of material, and the documentary never came out.
Yeah.
Somewhere it went from, we found some memos, we're in search of a lot more, but we found some memos that talked about there was a 2.5-hour rough cut, and somewhere after that, it wasn't a 2-hour documentary. It was now going to be a 53-minute for syndication to television stations around the world. And they actually finished that 53-minute version, but it never came out. And we were able to track down the only 2 known prints in the vault at MGM here in Los Angeles. Long story, but we found them there. So I have that to work with. But David, the Holy Grail is what happened to those 65 hours of raw material. And not only that, but they took a portable 8-track tape machine with them. And they recorded 6 of their 11 concerts in Eastern Europe. And where are those tapes?
Oh my.
Nobody has them. Nobody knows where they are. So we've been on this hunt for that Holy Grail for some months now. And part of our search has been hindered because we think the answer as to what happened to this material are in the files of the State Department, but much as in Canada, down here, the government archives are all closed. And so we haven't been able to get in there and get access to the material, but things are starting to open. So we're hoping in July we'll be able to get in there. But that's our Holy Grail here. And, it isn't like you could fit it in one box, 65 hours of material is probably 8 or 10 boxes.
Yeah, or if not a pallet of just reels, my God, yeah.
Yeah, it's not going to like be in somebody's closet or under their bed, So anyway, that's the Holy Grail we're searching for at the moment. And you can probably tell from my voice, but I get frustrated if we don't find it, but I'm just really excited to be on the hunt for this stuff, because it does just give you such a great feeling if you do find it.
Oh man, I hope you do. And I mean, that dovetails into something else I'd love to ask, because we're always like, as audiences, we're always fascinated, and the stories of musicians always seem to make really great stories, be they something joyful with Sergio or complex with Train or just anything. But I mean, I'm kind of curious, what is it about sort of the life arc of the popular musician that is so compelling to audiences from your perspective?
I think, David, music holds such a key place in most of our hearts. Many of us can attach important moments in our life to a song, to a band, to a concert we might have attended, to something we heard on the radio, something we sang in a chorus at school, whatever it is, music seems to have such an impact on people. And because of that, I think there's a natural desire to know more about the people whose music that we love, but also about the creation of that music. And that's where I think the interesting story lies for most of these artists is what were, as I was saying before, what are those key events in a life that shape the artist and shape the art? And that's why I think it appeals to so many people. And even if you don't know the music specifically of a particular artist, there will likely be things in that story that you can relate to and find interesting. I was watching a documentary some months ago. Now, I could say it was just because it was the pandemic and my wife and I were locked at home, and what else are we going to do? But there was a documentary on one of the streaming services about Joe Cocker. I knew a couple of his songs, didn't really know much about him, and watched this documentary. I didn't think the documentary was great, but his story was so fascinating. So anyway, I think it really just sort of depends on the artist in question. You were referencing some others, and the one I will talk about from time to time is there was a very successful documentary about Amy Winehouse a few years ago.
Yes.
I know it did really well, but it didn't grab me. And the reason it didn't grab me is that about 20 minutes into what was a 2-hour documentary, I just got tired of the subject making one bad decision after another and seeing all the leeches that were hanging on to her. And it just became the same for the rest of the documentary. And I stopped caring about her. And that to me diminishes any impact a film can have, is if you do not care about the central figure. And I always find that a challenge in my own documentaries, whether it's a complicated character like Coltrane, or whether it's a very self-destructive character like Harry Nilsson, or a very provocative character like John Lennon. I always view it as my job to be able to enable the audience to get a sense that they really know this person, really get a sense of who they were through their work, through relationships with friends and family and colleagues, but also even in those darkest moments to find a way that we can make them relatable, that you care about what's happening to them. And again, going back to what I just said, if you care about a lead character, you will sit through anything to get to the end of the movie.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the magic of something like Sergio Mendes and the Key of Joy, because, like, at least from my perspective, it wasn't trying to be sort of this pop culturally analytical piece about his career. It was trying to give us a sense of the man, and, like it says in the title, give us a sense of the joy of the music and of his life. And I think that's an important thing that gets lost in a lot of these. And I'm kind of curious, from your perspective, was there a movie or a moment in your life where you sort of understood sort of the power of not just the story, but making sure it was the story about an individual as opposed to just sort of laying out a career arc and trying to sort of be almost reporting as opposed to telling us about an individual?
You bet. I was 12 years old. My parents had taken me to see a revival of Lawrence of Arabia.
I love it. Okay.
One of the greatest movies ever made. And I'm sitting in the movie theater, staring up at the screen, and my mouth is just hanging open in wonder at this thing that had epic photography, epic writing, epic directing, epic performances. And you did get a sense of the social, political, and cultural landscape of the times in which Lawrence lived, but it was all through the prism of an extraordinary life. And I think not only did that movie make me want to get in this business, but I think it's always shaped my storytelling in terms of I'm a story guy. So it's like, what's the story? Is the story compelling enough, interesting enough? Are there enough either twists and turns or richness and texture that's going to make it of interest to people? And then how best do I present that? So that's my challenge. But it's always, and I'm not big into analysis or that sort of thing. I'm much more, here's the life, you decide how you feel about it. I remember there was one review, I think it was the Village Voice, I'm not sure now. There was one review of Chasing Train that was very critical of me because I didn't talk about technically why Coltrane was such a great saxophone player.
Oh, good Lord.
You know, thank you for saying that. It was exactly my attitude. And I was just, 3 people would have watched that movie.
Yeah.
I was much more interested in the human being behind it and not analyzing how he played his instrument, which he did beautifully, of course. And I think it's the same for most of my subjects. I mean, John Lennon, we did spend some time trying to enable the audience to understand the environment, the political and the cultural and the social environment of the late 60s and early 70s, just so they could understand where Lennon fit into that landscape. But it wasn't an analysis of it. It was really a look at John Lennon and how he navigated that landscape.
Mm.
So you've really hit on an interesting point. I think there are those documentaries that are very academic and tend to analyze things and give you dates and places and stuff. And I'm much less interested in that, in the what and when something happened. I'm much more interested in why it happened and the impact of what happened. And so, that's just, you put 10 of us documentary filmmakers in a room, you'll probably get 10 answers to your question. So that's mine.
Well, you know what? Just put a bow on this. I mean, thank you so much for the time, and thank you for creating this little piece of cinematic joy out there in the universe, because we really got a sense of who Sergio is as a person. And I mean, I think at the end of the day, that's what draws people in, people getting to know about people. And it's a fantastic film. And just congratulations again, and thanks for the time, and thanks for the good work, sir.
Well, thank you, David. I appreciate it. If you don't mind, I can mention that we had a sort of odd release pattern for this film. We actually had finished it in late 2019. We premiered it at the Santa Barbara International Film Festival in January of 2020. And we had 2 standing ovations, one for the film itself, and then one for Sergio when he got up on stage with his band and performed a few songs after the film. The audience never sat down. They were just on their feet the whole time. But then, we were going to be in theaters in the US and Canada and Europe in the late spring. And then, of course, COVID put an end to that for us, as it did for so many films. And so what we ended up with, we had to rethink everything. And our distributor ended up making a deal with PBS here in the United States to do a teaser version, an appetizer version, if you will, running 60 minutes. And it's called Sergio Mendes and Friends, A Celebration. And it's derived from the feature-length documentary. And the feature-length documentary will be out on streaming platforms on October 1st this year. Not quite sure exactly where at the moment, but that'll be decided in the next month or 2.
Well, fantastic.
But if people tune into their favorite PBS station starting June 1, they'll be able to see Sergio Mendes and Friends, A Celebration. And if they are generous to that station, one of the gifts they get will be a DVD of the full-length feature doc.
Oh, excellent. That's fantastic.
So I'm very pleased about that. And I'm just glad people are going to get a chance to see the film. And one last thing, David, I know you got to go, but is one of the coolest things about my job, particularly when I'm doing a film on somebody who's still with us,
Yeah.
is that here's someone whose work I admired and enjoyed from the time I was a kid, and now I can call him my friend, and that's a really nice thing. And my wife and I have gotten very close to Sergio and his beautiful wife Gracinha, and we have a good time together. And that's just an extra bonus after having had the pleasure of making a film.
That is an absolute trip. And I mean, that's just one of the pure joys of this business in many ways that doesn't get told enough. And I'm glad you shared that with me, John. And just this was a delightful talk, man. I'm so glad you had the time to we had the time to talk about the film.
Me too. Thanks so much for the interest, David.
All right, thanks again, John.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.